Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Thank you very, very much for listening and tuning in to episode 8 of the HuddleUK podcast. We were going to make this a big bumper episode. The combine's finished now. The tag deadline is over. Free agency starts next week. But we had so much great chat recording this episode. We thought we'd break it up into 2 different episodes. So today we've got 2 guests on, and we've got another special guest on another episode, which I think will probably come out tomorrow morning, if not early next week towards the start of free agency. Before we get into it, as always, I'm your host, Philip Marsh of HuddleUK. We've got Chris Trapasso, who's CBS Sports Draft analyst. He's going to be joining us on this episode, as well as International Fan of the Year for the Washington Commanders, Scott Hartley. We had Scott's podcast co-host on with us earlier, and I believe in our second episode of the HuddleUK podcast before. So we've got Scott on as well. We had a few Washington fans asking us to get him on. So congratulations to Scott from the outset. We'll hear from him at the end. But Chris Trapasso is up first. We watched the Combine. I'm sure a lot of you watched the Combine. Chris was at the Combine and has got all of his takes over on CBS Sport. You can see his updated mock draft every week. And I wanted to pick his brains on the players he watched, the sleepers, those who didn't necessarily perform as well as they'd hoped at the Combine, and sort of the weight of the Combine, what it actually means to teams, how much stock general managers and different franchises put into it. So Chris gives us all the answers on that. We go into a few free agent signings as well. So before we start, please remember all the online content over at www.huddleuk.com. We've got brilliant stories up every single day. It's teams and the writers for their teams to look ahead to the draft, what holes need filling on the rosters for your team. Have a little look there. Loads of opinion, as I say, every day new content, and the HuddleUK podcast, which you're listening to. You can be on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or listen to it on the HuddleUK website. Thank you very much for listening. And without further ado, Chris Trapasso. Well, first up, joining the Huddle this week, we've gone stateside again to get the expert opinion from the other side of the pond. Joining us is NFL draft analyst for CBS Sport, Chris Trapasso. Chris, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited to talk to you guys. I think this is my first podcast with an across-the-pond sports network in a very long time, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Oh, well, honored to be the first one in a while here at HuddleUK. You were at the Combine yourself, I believe, last week in Indy. It's an event, I think, with each year over here in the UK, more people get involved in it. More people are trying to get involved in trying to see what does a 40-yard dash mean, what is a broad jump, that sort of stuff. How would you sum it up for someone who'd not seen it before? How much weight, I guess, is the question, can you put on the skills and the drills that the players are going through?
Okay, that's a really good question, I think, for anyone getting involved in football. And if you're listening to this podcast, I assume you're probably pretty interested in the NFL. I think it weighs a lot. That's just for myself as an evaluator and for NFL teams. And here's the reason why. Now we have 25 years of officially recorded data of 40-yard dashes, broad jumps, verticals, the whole thing. And measurables, guys that are 6'5", 280, that ran this weight. And it's not easy to do this or to synthesize this type of and this amount of data, but we can look and say, oh, look, J.J. Watt in 2011 was 6'6", 290, had a 3-cone that was below 7 seconds, a vertical that was here, a broad jump that was here. So I think for as much as it's easy to fall in love or even hate a player on film with your own observations, you get to the Combine, and obviously the fact that it's quantitative, there's really no area for bias. And it's, hey, look, this guy, let's say Tyler Booker, a guard in this class from Alabama, everyone loves his film, tests like a lower-level athlete. We just haven't seen a lot of guards with such a slow 40, such a short vertical, and a short broad jump that have become quality players in the NFL. So it certainly, to me, weighs a lot because I think in most cases, the best players in the NFL are the high-caliber athletes. So that's what the teams, especially in the first round, are looking for, and the Combine allows those teams to get all of this data all over one weekend.
Do you think some teams or some general managers put more stock into it than tape? Because I imagine there's a variance across the league.
Sure, that's a great question. I don't know if we're to the point where there's more weight in the Combine than film, but I don't think we're too far away from that because we've seen over the years, even the Bill Belichick's of the world, would have bad drafts 3 or 4 years in a row, and you're like, how is this happening? Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, who has an analytics background, the GM of the Minnesota Vikings. It wouldn't surprise me if he's close to 50-50. Andrew Berry from the Cleveland Browns, another analytics background, Ivy League educated. I would be pretty confident in saying he's factoring in the analytics, and when I say analytics, I mean the combine numbers element to his whole scouting process. So there probably are starting to be more and more that are leaning towards saying, look, we trust our scouts, I trust myself, but in general, the numbers and the historical data that we have, the sample size is big enough where we can really use that as a tool to identify who's overvalued and who's undervalued in the draft.
I want to touch on a few of the sort of key moments from the week in Indy, not necessarily part of the testing, but Abdul Carter was not consensus number one pick, but on a lot of people's mock draft was going first to the Titans. Now with this foot injury, how much do you think that will impact where he goes in the draft? He's still probably a top 5, top 10 guy, but more and more now I'm seeing with each week go on, like yourself, which we'll get onto in a moment, but that first pick maybe now more likely to be traded away and someone else coming up to take a quarterback.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I think that is very much in play. It felt like pre-combine, he was, I don't want to say locked into the number one overall slot, but with this quarterback class seemingly being a little bit weaker than most and certainly weaker than last year's, Carter's film, the athleticism just really stood out. He had the shoulder injury in the college football playoff, but it felt like that would not be any major issue. Now, a foot injury like that, I think, adds some uncertainty, which there wasn't a lot with Abdul Carter pre getting this news, which happened during the week of the combine. There's a world in which he still goes number one overall. But like you're insinuating, when you're starting to create some dings on his draft resume, let's call it, I think the GM of the Titans, Mike Borgonzi, who was in Kansas City for the longest time, it'll be harder for him to pull the trigger to say, ooh, I like his film, but he's got the shoulder, now he's got a foot. It just increases the likelihood that he's there at 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, somewhere within the top 10.
Yeah, you've mentioned that there. His first-time general manager at the Titans this year, who's come across, I believe, was the assistant general manager with the Chiefs.
Yes,
now,
correct.
The surname I always get wrong, but Mike Borgonzi, I think you'd probably say it better than I.
No,
that's
a
lot of pressure on a first-time general manager, a new franchise with the number one overall pick on his shoulders. Must be feeling that weight.
Yeah, no, definitely. And that's what I think that a lot of people at the Combine, a lot of other draft analysts and media members, a few scouts that I talked to said, look, this is not, it was kind of the general consensus. This is not a deal breaker where we're going to be talking about him late first round or anything like that. It wasn't actually a broken foot. And I try to stay away from some of the medical terminology because I'm not a medical expert whatsoever. But the number one overall picks are usually the players with the big-time traits, big-time production, and they don't have injury history. So now the shoulder and the foot, we're probably not going to see him work out pre-combine at the Penn State Pro Day, although it is like the last Pro Day in the circuit, like March 28th. So he, in theory, will have time to heal. But yeah, a lot of pressure. You don't necessarily, your first time picking a player as a GM, and you have the first pick, and you're going to go with someone that has some maybe serious injury or lingering injury concerns. That's why I think that it went from, it felt like 70 or 80% chance of him being the number one overall pick, maybe closer to a coin flip at this point.
I know it's in your bio or your description on X, sort of 2 tips for a trade, for a draft even, is don't draft a running back in the first round and trade down.
Yes.
So now, to go to your draft, your latest one, which came out this week, you've now got the Giants moving up to the first overall pick to take Cam Ward. You see him as the better of the 2 quarterbacks in this draft?
I do. I think they're similar, and that's Cam Ward and obviously Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. They're similar. I think Cam Ward has a little bit of a stronger arm. He is a better improviser, and I'm not going to go into him being like a better leader or any of the off-field stuff or the maturity things because I'm not in the locker room. I wasn't in the interview rooms at the Combine. But I like the fact that Cam Ward has been an ascending player in college. He started at Incarnate Word, a small school, 2 years ago, Transfers to Washington State, plays really well. Transfers to Miami. And there was a few scouts that I talked to last summer that were like, let's see how he plays going from Washington State to the ACC. He threw 40 touchdowns, fewer than 10 interceptions, had a fantastic season. So I think Cam Ward, and that felt like the consensus too with everyone else, all the other colleagues that are covering the NFL draft and evaluating these players, that Cam Ward, maybe not the consensus number one overall player, but the consensus number one quarterback in this class.
One of the funny moments at the Combine, you could hear it in the crowd, and there was a lot of anticipation for the wide receivers running the 40-yard dash, because Isaiah Bond from Texas had been giving it a bit big on social media. I think it was on Instagram, saying, he was going to do running the 4-1s, beat Xavier Worthy. Can't remember what the exact time he ran in the end was, but 4-4 something, I think.
I think 4-4-1, I believe.
4-4-1, which is not slow. It's no slouch. I think 4-4-4 was the average for a top 10 wide receiver last year. So he's below that. But there was a lot of anticipation, wasn't there? And it kind of felt like a bit of a bubble burst.
Yeah, it was like if Isaiah Bond just wouldn't have said anything, we would have been talking right now, like, what a great time for this Texas receiver. He looks fast on film. He runs 4-4 flat, essentially. Really good. And what's ironic is his teammate, Matthew Golden, didn't say a word, and he runs 4.29. So I like the players being confident, and we've heard so many of these. Almost every year there's usually one guy that says, I'm going to break the record. But this should be just another cautionary tale. If you're a combine prospect, don't say you're going to break some record, because that sets the bar exceptionally high, and it's very hard to break those records. We don't see them happen very often.
Matthew Golden, potentially, I'm trying to think of some other names now before I make this claim, but of all the wide receivers, was the one who helped his stock the most at the Combine.
No, I think that's a great point. I mean, there was some chatter after it happened, and this is through some text because a lot of us were already back from Indy, that he could be the first receiver off the board. Like Luther Burden from Missouri is another one. Didn't have the production this past year. He had tested pretty well. I believe he ran 4.41 too. He's kind of a bigger body, kind of like between Randall Cobb and DJ Moore, kind of in that vein. Ted McMillan from Arizona, who's a big body, 6'4", 219, did not work out. So yes, the Arizona Pro Day will happen, and McMillan could test very well. That could put him back into what felt like him as the consensus number one spot at receiver. But running 4.29, having a great end of the season for Matthew Golden, it wouldn't be surprising if we hear his name called first in what is, again, somewhat of a weaker wide receiver class.
One of the interesting ones that I saw, I think one of the first times I saw your name cropping up in this sort of draft cycle was after your first mock draft. I'm a LA Chargers fan personally, professionally here. We love all teams at HuddleUK, but I saw in your first mock draft that you'd mocked the Chargers with Bashal Tutin, who was a player that I think I saw a few tweets going, well, that's a surprise. It wasn't a name that anyone had seen mocked in the first round, and maybe won't go in the first round, but really showed out at the Combine, didn't it?
Absolutely. So that mock, what I did is I'm thinking back, this is like my 8th draft at CBS Sports, and over the years, I've realized that there's always, like, whether it's 2, 3, 4, 5, there's always prospects who literally test themselves into the first round, where you look at the numbers, like I said at the outset of this, you look at the history and say, man, there's not too many running backs who run sub 4.35, who run under that, run faster than that, and are just available like in the 5th round. So, and I think Bashal Tutin's film at Virginia Tech is very good. He was really elusive, not easy to tackle. The cutting skill was great. The vision is good. And now we know he is an elite level athlete for the running back position. I know there's a lot of buzz for Omarion Hampton after Ashton Genty. That's the running back from Boise State, Ashton Genty, and North Carolina for Omarion Hampton. Those could be the only two running backs we see in the first round, but in round 2, Bashal Tutin would make a lot of sense for the Chargers, for a lot of different teams, and really his combine workout is first round caliber. So if a team does pick him in round 1 like the Chargers, to me as an evaluator, I don't think that would necessarily be too early, although I'm not a huge fan of actually picking running backs in round 1.
You just beat me to the point I was about to make, because I found it funny that you'd had that as your prediction for the Chargers in your first mock, and then your Twitter bio or X bio says, don't draft first round running backs. Ashton Genty is the exception to that rule this year, though, isn't he? He will go, well, I'm just looking at your thing. You've got him as the 12th pick to the Cowboys. That seems to make a lot of sense to me. the Cowboys are a team that needs someone at running back. Wherever he goes, he's got all the talent and all the qualities that you need for a running back in the NFL.
1,000%. And a quick distinction that again, maybe some of your listeners getting into the whole crazy draft world of mock drafts and evaluations. My evaluations are one thing. Mock drafts, mostly, almost all of them, at least the ones that I do, are just a prediction of what I think will happen. So, like, I love Bashal Tutin. I think I have, like, a second-round grade on him, which for me, a running back, that's pretty high. Ashton Jeanty is one of the few running backs ever that I have actually graded as a first-round pick. Now, I understand we saw kind of a renaissance at the running back position. Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, of course, even Josh Jacobs, that has kind of helped boost the perceived value of the running back position. But what I've said on any other podcast that I've done or radio spots the last couple months since that, and I get a lot of that about my Twitter bio, like, hey, what the heck? Like, these are first-round running backs or these are big-time running backs that help their teams significantly in Baltimore and Green Bay and Philly. I counter with Bucky Irving was a 4th-round pick. Tyrone Tracy, 5th-round pick for the Giants, had a great rookie season. Chase Brown was a 6th-round pick, and he became like the clear bell cow for the Cincinnati Bengals. You're not going to maybe get a 2,000-yard season from a 4th-rounder, but I think you can still get the level of efficiency and production out of those backs. So, do I think Bashal Tutin is a lock for round 1? I don't, but I think being a 2nd-round pick at the running back spot is, to me, about as high as they should ultimately go. And I guess to answer your question, yes, Ashton Jeanty, speed, the best contact balance I have ever scouted, better than Saquon's, better than Bijan Robinson's. He just absorbs contact, does not go down. His equilibrium, I think, is tremendous. So, yes, he will be someone on that rookie deal when he's still relatively cheap. There's not an insane amount of mileage on his legs, although he carried the football a lot last season. He will be worth, for a team that has a good offensive line, a first-round pick that can get the most out of him in his first 4 years in the NFL.
Well, Austin Eckler was an undrafted free agent and got 18-plus touchdowns for 2 consecutive years for the Chargers. So, yeah, I'd definitely take your point and would always bow to the knowledge of someone who's been doing this a lot longer than myself. Are there any other players that, in particular, at the Combine? I know there were a few players that had really good ones. Nick Emenori, who we said, and Marion Hampton, you've touched upon as well. Were there any ones a bit deeper, maybe sleepers is the term that gets pounded around a lot in the NFL that you would want to bring up?
Yeah, so look at the Combine numbers for Darian Porter, cornerback from Iowa State. Almost 6'3", 195 pounds. I believe he ran 4.3 flat. Had a 3-cone under 7 seconds, and that is like the magical threshold that you want, whether you're a 6'3", 190-pound corner, whether you're a D-end, 7 seconds, you want to be under that. And there's not a lot of players who can do that drill in under 7 seconds. His tackling is not great on film, but with that size and speed, he has arms over 33 inches, which is incredibly long to break up passes. Darian Porter, I think if we wanted to say Matthew Golden did the most for his stock at receiver, Darian Porter, a name that not a lot of people were talking about pre-Combine, that you look at the figures and you're like, this looks like Tariq Woolen of the Seattle Seahawks, like big, super duper fast, incredibly long. I wouldn't be shocked, just based on traits alone, if he's a first or an early second rounder in a cornerback class. That's kind of interesting because a lot of the top prospects are injured. Will Johnson, Ben Morrison from Notre Dame, and Siobhan Revelle from East Carolina.
Yeah, just looking at the numbers here, 97th percentile for height, 98th percentile for the 40, 94 for the broad jump. Elite numbers across the board.
Absolutely.
Where did you have him going? I'm not sure if you had him in the first round of your most recent mock draft. Or
I did. I did. I don't remember where I sent him, but he was one that I didn't have him in my predicting players who could go after the Combine in the first round, but then seeing those numbers, he just feels like, I want to say Indianapolis Colts, maybe?
Correct, yeah.
The Colts. And this kind of goes back to your question about GMs that accentuate or prioritize the draft more. If you look at the draft history, and you would have to be a Colts fan or a huge draft nerd like me to do this, but if you look at the draft history of Colts GM Chris Ballard, he has an affinity for the big-time testers. Now, a lot of the times, he's drafted players who are just not really good football players, but are just like track guys. So that's kind of where I found that fit. They need a cornerback. They really only have Kenny Moore. They don't have much on the outside. And at this point, just because, like you're mentioning, like 98th percentile here, 96th percentile there, Darian Porter can take advantage of some of these top-tier corners being injured and ultimately go in the first round.
You're a Western New Yorker yourself, I believe, if the research is to be correct. 2 franchises in New York, or kind of New Jersey, depending on how technical you want to be, who have got a lot of work to do next season. Lots of holes, quarterbacks a question mark for both of them. How do you see them playing their cards in free agency, which starts next week, and then the draft?
Well, to me, what's weird is the Giants, their GM, Joe Shane, their head coach, Brian Daboll, they have to feel, and they probably know that they're on the hot seat. Like I don't know if they have to like win 2 playoff games to keep their jobs, but they have to be above 500. They have to be competing late in the season, most likely. And they still have needs, but I don't think they're like incredibly far from doing that. Now, the NFC, and certainly in their division with the Commanders and the Eagles, it's pretty tough in the NFC East. Malik Neighbors had a great rookie season. We mentioned Tyrone Tracy. The offensive line played a little better than people thought. They have Brian Burns on the edge. They certainly need some pieces along their defense. Andrew Phillips, their slot corner, great rookie season for them as well. So I think they will be reasonably big spenders because they're not paying a lot of marquee talent. But to me, they're a little bit closer. They need a quarterback. They need, whether it's trading up for Cam Ward or just staying put and hoping that he falls, they need to rectify the quarterback position. And as for the Jets, we've seen the Jets be more competitive over the last 3 or 4 years than the Giants. If you look at the roster and you look at the impending free agents that they have, they are, like, to me, at the ground floor of a rebuilding process. They have a new head coach in Aaron Glenn, new GM, new coaching staff, new everything. No Aaron Rodgers anymore. They have some pieces, Breece Hall, Quincy Williams. I still think, though, they need more pass rush on the inside. Their secondary has gone from being an elite group, if they're going to lose DJ Reed, to a group that's just Sauce Gardner and not much else. They're going to lose Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses potentially. They're 2 veteran offensive tackles. So to me, it seems weird to say this, but I think the Giants are actually further along than the Jets. They both, though, need to, I think, prioritize defense in what is seemingly a better defensive draft than it is an offensive draft in April.
You mentioned Aaron Glenn. There's been quite a few. There always is in the NFL. There's always a lot of new coaching changes. Aaron Glenn's one of, I think, 6 or 7 new head coaches going into 2025. Pete Carroll, Mike Vrabel, Kellen Moore, Ben Johnson. I'm sure there's more. I forgot Liam Cohen. Yeah. Are there any ones in particular that you thought of and you saw and you thought was a really good marriage between philosophy and franchise?
You know what? I'll go. I mean, I think Ben Johnson with Caleb Williams would be the easy answer. I will go with the entire organizational shift in Las Vegas with the Raiders. Pete Carroll, such a good head coach for the longest time. He was one of the steadiest coaches in the league in Seattle. And if we go way back to like early 2000s and in the 90s, he was a defensive mastermind. Like he had established himself as one of the better defensive minds in the league. He pairs himself with Chip Kelly, who wins the national title finally at Ohio State. Now, being a head coach in the NFL did not go very well for him in Philadelphia, and then the 1 year in San Francisco after that. But I think if he's just tasked with taking on the offense and getting the ball out of whichever quarterback they pick's hands in a hurry, they have Jacoby Myers, they have Brock Bowers, who set a bunch of records at tight end last year. They just re-signed Max Crosby. Christian Wilkins, their big-ticket free agent that they signed last year, will be coming back from injury. Do I think the Raiders are going to suddenly compete with the Chiefs in the AFC West? Probably not. But I think that is a good combination of coaches, just coaching staff in general, that Mark Davis and now their new minority owner, Tom Brady, has put together with the Raiders.
That division's shaping up quite nicely for next season.
Yeah, it is. Really tough division.
They've got a revenge tour going. Chargers, as I said, I know they're my team, but building blocks with Jim Harbaugh, I think they're looking, Colston Loveland's, who you've mocked for them in the first round, it's who I want as a fan as well. I think would be perfect fit and reunion of the Michigan team there. Bo Nix and the Broncos, I think, exceeded everyone's expectations last season, and now the Raiders. That could be a really tasty division in 2025.
1,000%. I think there was a few years ago that there was hype for this division to be super good, and it kind of didn't live up to it. But year 2 Bo Nix with Sean Payton, everything that you just laid out, we've seen the history of Jim Harbaugh when he was at San Diego and Stanford and the 49ers. He builds programs, let's call it, even though that's more of a college term. He builds them up very well. Justin Herbert has all the talent in the world. I think he has the talent to be an elite level quarterback in the Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen category, let's say. Ladd McConkey has a great rookie season. We know what the Chiefs can do, although they are going to probably lose some pieces here and there. So, yeah, it's certainly a division that I think is shaping up to be arguably the most competitive. I can't say I've gone through every other division and thought that far ahead yet. I'm watching a ton of film and trying to evaluate everything I saw and all the data from the Combine. But you're right, the AFC West, at least right now on paper, looks as competitive as any in the NFL.
I was interested to see in your mock that you mocked a wide receiver to the Chiefs right at the end of the first round, Jalen Knoll. Another speedster, not quite as quick as Xavier Worthy. No one probably ever will be, despite what Isaiah Bond and other people want to claim. But after that Super Bowl, I think a lot of Chiefs fans might be concerned about the defense or the offensive line. What made you lean towards a wide receiver with that pick?
That's a good question. So I will say this first. I do one mock draft a week. So I kind of cycle through, and it's not just to throw names in. It's really at this point when the college season is done, now the Combine is done, you're really trying to plug in needs with players that seemingly will go in those ranges. But you got to try to do different ripple effects to see, hey, let's see what happens if Cam Ward is actually the first pick and Abdul Carter falls. Oh, now there's different players available late in the first for a team like the Chiefs. The only reason why I haven't mocked offensive tackle to the Chiefs as frequently is they tried that last year with Prince, what was his name? I was going to say Princely Uman Malayan, but that's in this year's class. With Kingsley Suamatia. I'm sorry.
That's
Kingsley
right.
Suamatia. And there's so many of those like tongue twister names, and I was thinking of the edge rusher that's in this class. Kingsley Suamatia, picked him in the second round, freaky athlete, wasn't strong enough, and they tried him out there at both tackle positions, and he was just not ready. So obviously the Chiefs are in win now mode. I've kind of leaned away from that because it feels like they'll be a little bit more active on the veteran market to bring in someone that can play right away. You know, Donovan Smith wasn't an amazing left tackle for them, but he got the job done. Jawan Taylor they brought in, obviously. It seems like they'll probably go more in that direction. But I could be wrong. It just feels like usually offensive tackles, unless you're like Tristan Wirfs, take at least a year or so to get as strong as you need to be an effective blocker in the NFL.
Well, we're recording this chat on Thursday, and I've seen a lot of conversation with the news sort of came out yesterday about DK Metcalf and the Seattle Seahawks. One report saying earlier that the Seahawks want a first and a third round pick. I saw you put on X, good luck, essentially, with that. What sort of market value do you think he can fetch, and what sort of teams in free agency? I think the Patriots have named a few times. I know the Chargers were interested in him before. Where do you think you can see him going, taking everything into account like dead cap and the rest of it?
Yeah, so it comes at a bad time for the Seahawks because they just released Tyler Lockett on Wednesday. They could potentially be down their two super steady, great complementary wide receiver tandem with Metcalf requesting a trade. I don't think they're going to get a first and a third, and I'm only kind of laughing because he's not like 24. He's in the last year of his deal. He's going to want a huge deal, and especially if you get him and he plays to the level that you're hoping he plays at, over 1,000 yards, 10 plus touchdowns, he's going to be like, I want $30 to $35 million a year, and I'm getting close to age 30. So it kind of feels like they're going to, if they can get a third, I think that would be really good for them. I mean, Deebo Samuel just went for a fifth, and the big reason why is that he was, I think, due like $17 million this season and is probably going to want a new deal as well. But you just highlighted it. Patriots, I don't think the Buffalo Bills are completely out of the realm of possibility. And your Chargers would make a lot of sense for another awesome complement. You have Ladd McConkey, who can certainly get down the field. He's fast. He's 4-3 guy, but is really good at separating underneath and at the intermediate level. DK Metcalf is just take the lid off the defense, win in those rebounding situations down the field with his speed and his size. So those three teams seem to make the most sense. The Patriots have a lot of room cap-wise, and they want to build around Drake May. And I think the Chargers and the Bills are looking for at least one more receiver to help them get over the top.
Because I know your sort of area of expertise is the draft and the young player analyst, but with free agency about to start, you kind of have to get that out the way, don't you, before you can be more certain with the mock draft?
Oh, yeah, there's been so many, like, February and early March mocks where, like, I'm trying to think, okay, like, this is going way back, and I don't know how this popped into my head. The year that the Bears signed Allen Robinson, that would be 2018, and I remember every mock draft I did, and a lot of people, it was like, they're going to pick Calvin Ridley at 8. I think they had the 8th or 9th pick that year, or, like, at least originally going into that draft. And it just made sense. They needed a receiver. They had just drafted Mitch Trubisky. They needed another one. They signed Allen Robinson, and it's like, oh, they're not going to draft Calvin Ridley. So like things like that happen all the time. Free agency is super fun. I love it. It's actually right around my birthday. My birthday's next week. So it's always like a birthday present to myself, just checking Twitter and seeing all the moves. But yes, like by, say, third week of March, yeah, there's second, third, fourth wave, lower level free agents. But once the big chips fall, then we have a really good idea of the still positions of need that these teams have going into April.
When's your birthday? My birthday's next week as well.
March 14th.
Okay, I'm the 10th. So not too far away.
We're Pisces. Yeah.
We're Pisces, yeah. That's the best one. On the free agency, there's loads of wide receivers, towards the end of their career who could make a difference. Stephon Diggs, I know, bad injury last year. Mike Evans is another one. Keenan Allen, place in my heart. Could be really interesting to see where some of these, really seasoned vets end up.
Yeah, and I wonder, too, you bring up Mike Evans, and it's like, it seems like there's such a strong culture in Tampa Bay that they would want to bring him back. Chris Godwin is another one there that, like, they just heap praise on him and say, oh, man, he is, like, the ultimate off-the-field and locker room guy, too. But are they going to be able to keep both? Is there going to be any movement with, which I know this is not at the end of his career, but T. Higgins, is that going to be a tag and then trade situation where we know they've placed the Bengals have placed the tag on him, but are they going to ultimately tag him and then trade him to someone else if they can't come to a long-term extension? So yeah, there are certainly some, older players. Devontae Adams is a free agent currently. I mean, could he sign with the team? There was plenty of interest when he, or I guess before he got traded to the Jets at the trade deadline in October last year. So yeah, there are some guys I think still have a little bit of juice that we've watched for the last decade plus that could be maybe that last piece to help a Chargers team or a Bills team or whatever, teams like that are right there, ultimately get just a little bit better that they need to get to ultimately get to a Super Bowl and win a Super Bowl.
You touched on the T. Higgins being tagged there. Personally, I could be wrong, but from my experience getting into the NFL and as a new sport, learning that from over here, not knowing a lot about it to start, the idea of a franchise tag seems absolutely crazy. Why would the Cincinnati Bengals, if you're trying to explain it to a British person who's never watched the NFL before, why would they choose to franchise tag T. Higgins this year?
It seems like the franchise tag, I mean, are a lot of utilities for it, but what your question insinuates what's happened, that it's just when teams get to a point where they reach free agency starting and they just have not come to a long-term deal with the player, instead of letting that guy go out and test the market and probably be a goner, they can slap the tag on this guy. It pays him a lot, like the average salary of the top 5 paid players at his position, but it's only a 1-year deal. So the players don't like it because there's no long-term job security, but the teams can say, hey, well, you're still going to get a lot of money. I think T. Higgins is like $25 or $26 million. It feels like for a team like the Bengals that's right there, that has an elite level offense, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, another wide receiver that they're going to have to do a long-term deal with at some point. Because of that, because there's a lot of guys who need to get paid, even Trey Hendrickson, who I thought should have won Defensive Player of the Year, their edge rusher. They have to pay him as well. There's too many negotiations going on, so they're like, we're going to slap this on T. Higgins now so he doesn't go out there and sign a monstrous deal. We secure his rights for at least another season, but are paying him big money, but we do not have to, invest 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Maybe we can watch him play in 2025, and if that production drops off a little, then he can hit free agency. So it's kind of in a way there are some positives for the player, but in general in the NFL that is so violent, there's so much injury, it's better for these guys to get a 2 or a 3 year deal instead of just a very expensive 1 year deal.
You'll have watched the sport significantly longer than me, but the Bengals side in 2024, I can't recall ever seeing a side which was so drastically good on one side of the ball and not on the other. Burrow and Chase and Higgins and the rest of them on offense last year were putting up 35, 40 points regularly. It was a historically good offense and historically bad defense, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was something that I don't remember ever seeing it being that drastic. Now certainly there have been teams that great defenses can't move the ball, or pretty good offenses. This was like arguably a top 2 or 3 offense, and passing offense maybe the best in the NFL, and secondary coverage, pass rush, one of the worst in the NFL. And they were still relatively close to the playoffs. They were like right there at the end. So I think if you're the Bengals, you are happy that this draft class is again, seemingly better on the defensive side. But I think the elephant in the room is you got to make sure T. Higgins is still here. And Jamar Chase, to me, it's Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, and A.J. Brown are the 3 best receivers in the NFL. You got to keep that trio intact because teams can't cover Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. When Higgins goes off, Jamar Chase is still a very formidable guy underneath. You can't double team either one of those players because Joe Burrow, his processing and his accuracy are so good. So yeah, it was something I, off the top of my head, cannot remember a bigger disparity between offense and defense in the NFL.
Of these younger group of wide receivers, who do you think's the next one who will be talked about in that conversation of Jefferson and Chase? For me, it's Brian Thomas Jr., but like could be bold claim with, Marvin Harrison and Malik Neighbors and others in there. Everything I saw of Brian Thomas Jr., I liked.
You just answered my question for me because that's who I was going to say. Like when when you asked, I'm thinking who. Rookie, okay, McConkey, Malik Neighbors had a great rookie season, but in terms of, and I'm looking at this, I think I always have a bias to look at players trait-wise, like almost from a draft angle, even when they're in the NFL. Brian Thomas has everything and can do everything that you want at wide receiver. He's big. He can beat press at the line of scrimmage with his feet, with his size, and just power. He can win down the field with speed. He tracks it like a center fielder. Great routes. He runs routes really like he's 5'10", 180 pounds, and he's much bigger than that. And after the catch, he's a gazelle. So I feel exactly like you do that if there is a young wide receiver, and he was only a rookie last year, who's going to ascend to that elite level status, it's Brian Thomas at the Jaguars.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see now going into his sophomore year with Trevor Lawrence back fit, what he can do. Just finally, before I let you get you back, as you say, you do a mock draft every week. They'd be changing every week. This week it's Cam Ward going first to the Giants, as we said. Who do you think come draft time? I know it's hard to say. You've just said Cam is the first pick. But with all the free agency changes, what do you think your prediction would be? Do you think the Titans will have the number 1 pick come April, late April, or do you think it will be someone else?
I think it'll be someone else. I think that, and I've gotten questions like, why wouldn't the Titans just stay put and pick Cam Ward? And that makes sense. That's like, it's usually the easiest answer is the one that's like the correct answer. That just makes sense. There's no complicated elements, trade parameters, anything like that. But I feel like their GM, Mike Borgonzi, being that it's the first year for him with a very barren roster, and that he got to see how to obviously correctly build a team under Brett Veach in Kansas City to, go to 3 straight Super Bowls, win 3 of them, 3 out of 5. He understands this roster is nowhere close. And to throw Cam Ward to the Lions, so to speak, with not a good offensive line, no real semblance of receivers outside of an aging Calvin Ridley, not a good defense, I think, is he going to be able to get a gigantic haul to move out of number 1 like, RG3 got for the Rams in 2012? No, I don't think that. But any type of trade back to get an extra second, an extra third, and maybe a next year second, something like that, I think is the more prudent decision. And there will be, whether it's the Giants, whether it's the Raiders, whether it's the Jets, desperate teams that just like, we need a quarterback, we're just going to pick one. We're further along in our rebuilding process than the Titans. So no, I do not think late April, I think April 24th is the first day of the draft. I don't think that the Titans will have that first pick.
I said that was my last question, but I do have one more that I just thought
That's fine.
of. The two quarterbacks at the top of this draft class, they're quite clearly the top two, Shadir Sanders and Cam Ward, who we touched upon. There were quite a few quarterbacks taken early last year. It was more of a quarterback-heavy draft. Yeah, was it 6 in the first round?
6 in the first 12 picks.
Yeah, which was unheard of, really, that volume of quarterbacks. Where would you slot these two in compared to the last year's 6?
Great question. So I wrote an article about this at CBS Sports. You guys could read. If you just Google Chris Trapasso CBS Sports, look at my archive. It's down a little bit because I think I wrote it like a week or two ago. I believe I had Cam Ward as 5th and Shadir Sanders last. Like, out of those 8, Sanders, and that's not to say he's a terrible prospect or I dislike him as a player. I just have like some questions about his traits. I think he has pretty heavy feet. The accuracy is not fantastic. It's not bad, but it's not CJ Stroud or Joe Burrow level. And I think if you're not a high caliber athlete, you need to be hyper accurate in today's NFL. Cam Ward, I kind of feel similarly that I did to Bo Nix last year. So he's right in that range. The Jaden Daniels and the Caleb Williams and the Drake Mays, they were different trait-wise quarterbacks. Bigger arms, athleticism, more production, more consistent ball placement. So I think Cam Ward is still a quality player, but he would be 5. Shadir Sanders would actually bring up the rear at number 8 out of those 8 quarterbacks.
Very interested, very interested. Well, we'll soon see. It's only a month or so away for the draft. Chris, thank you very, very much for joining the huddle today. We really appreciate you taking the time. Happy birthday as well in advance.
You too.
For next week. Chris, as I said, at the start, draft player, young player analyst for CBS Sport. You can find him over on X at Chris Trapasso. Are you on other socials as well, I'm sure?
Yeah, Instagram, but actually TikTok. During the season, I do a lot of film reviews on TikTok. It's just an easy way to edit and add voiceovers to the video. So check me out there, especially post-draft, to do some draft recaps, and then certainly during the NFL season in the fall.
A big thanks once again to Chris for joining the huddle this week. As he said at the start of that chat, the first time he's spoken to a media outlet, I think he said, or an organisation this side of the pond. So pleasure to have him on and good to get his insight, his knowledge into the combine and the draft. As we touched on, you can go and find his mock drafts at CBS Sport. You can follow him, Chris Trapasso, on X. To wrap up this week's episode, as we mentioned right at the top, the International Fans of the Year were announced recently. So we'll have a bit of a chat now with Scott to round off the episode. Thank you very much again if you're listening. Thank you again to Chris. We'll get into that Washington Fan of the Year. Well, rounding off week 8 or episode 8 of the HuddleUK podcast is one of the International Fans of the Year. We're recording this on Thursday. There's been a lovely tweet from the team today. Scott Hartley joined us, International Fan of the Year for 2024 for the Washington Commanders. What a day you've had today, Scott.
Yeah, fantastic day today, really, to be honest with you. It's been the hardest thing to keep quiet for a month or so. Obviously, we were told the beginning of February that we'd won International Fan of the Year. Obviously, myself representing the Commanders and all the other 32 teams got their representatives at the same time, but all had to be hush-hush until just after the 20th, I think it was the 24th, was the announcement. But it's very cool that the team put that out today, so a lot of love on social media. So, yeah, I'm very, very pleased, and I'm glad to be joining you as well.
Yeah, well, we had your co-host of the 1 Point Safety Show, Andy Lockhart, on before, and a few of your fans from that podcast and the Bunko came and followed us over during the Huddle UK. So when it got announced, we had a few people replying to us saying, "Oh, you need to get Scott on." So we duly applied. We do what the fans want to hear over here at Huddle UK. Talk to me about the process for fans who wouldn't know, or UK fans who might, fancy their chances to be a International Fan of the Year. What's the process like? How did you find out about it? And do you nominate yourself, or do you get nominated?
You can nominate yourself. However, I did not nominate myself. I got an email from the team basically explaining that 11 people had nominated me. I don't know who they were. Still to this day, I'm not sure. I think I've got an inkling on a few of them as to who they may be, and a few people have reached out and went, hi, I sort of did nominate you, and I was like, all right, brilliant, thank you. Quite a few of our American listeners and guys we've met over the last few seasons did that. But yeah, basically the way it works is you go into a ballot, and obviously the team will look at all the submissions of everybody who has come through from all over the world who are representing the international fan base, and then they'll pick a winner basically from there. And as a prize, I got a lovely gift box from the team who sent me a game-worn Frankie Louvu jersey that was signed, so that was really pretty cool. And I thought, well, that's amazing. And then the next thing you know, it's, actually, we're going to pay for your all expenses to go to Green Bay to the draft, which is just incredible. We're finding out a little bit more information as time's going on what sort of things we'll be doing. But apparently the consensus is that we get to make a day 3 pick as well, which is going to be pretty awesome. So... yeah,
are you going to get to walk out on the stage and say the 200 and whatever pick?
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Just give me John Smith from Iowa or something like that, please.
Oh, God, yeah. There's some funny names in the NFL. You wouldn't want one of those. Oh, that'll be fun. I'll be keeping an eye out for that, definitely, on day 3.
So it's definitely a day 3 pick from what I believe. I am in a WhatsApp group now with a few other all the UK and Ireland based winners, which is fantastic, and they've welcomed me into quite a weird and wonderful family, if you like, because there's a lot of the actual fans of the year as well, and the international fans of the year. There are various Facebook pages and stuff that they're getting us involved in, saying this is the sort of thing you can expect from previous years. And yeah, it's been really informative, but we're just waiting for teams to sort out travel details, etc. now. So if you do want to put yourself in for it, It's a great honour, and in all honesty, there could have been, I mean, there's hundreds of people out there, thousands, who are more loyal and been supporting the Commanders, especially for years on end, listening to long wave radio and the like, and old school Forces radio back in the day. But I'm honoured and blessed to represent the team. You know what I mean? It is an absolute blessing, to be honest.
What's your background then? How did you get into being a Commanders fan or Redskins fan? It would have been initially, I assume.
Yeah, it was. So initially, I kind of pinned my colours to the mast in 2012 during the RG3 off-season. Before that, I'm ex-military, so ex-Royal Air Force. So when I was serving in there, I was serving along quite a lot of American troops, and I was watching the game thinking, I'm not really interested in this game at all, but you're having Super Bowl parties and I don't really know what's going on. So I started to get involved in it in probably the early 2000s, and then I had a few friends who were Green Bay fans, a few friends who were Bears fans, and they had a bit of a rivalry. And then Madden obviously exploded, and it was like, actually, yeah, I'll kind of watch you play this game because I'm terrible at computer games. And then I thought, well, okay, I'll give it a whirl. And then I saw a game against Mark Rippon was a quarterback, and I saw a game against the Giants, and we were absolutely awful away in the Meadowlands, which was standard, and we were 26-3 down at half time. And then for some reason I saw the highlights package and we brought it back and won the game. And I was like, wow, okay, I like the colour scheme, love the old logo, obviously. And then I thought, yeah, I'm going to nail my colours to the mast. Then that draft, RG3 was all over the newspapers. We were getting a bit more content. And I thought, yeah, this is the team I'm going to follow. And ever since then, it's kind of been downhill, apart from this year, just gone. So, yeah, I must be a glutton for punishment, maybe.
Yeah, because I know a lot of Washington fans got into it in the late 80s, early 90s, when the heyday for the Commanders, but you got into it kind of at the low point then.
Terrible, yeah. I mean, I've seen nothing but the Dan Snyder era, apart from these last few years since obviously Josh Harris has took over. So the less said about that man, the better. But yeah, it's been a rough ride being a Commanders fan, but I've enjoyed it. I mean, we've had a season ticket for the last 3 years, which we give away on a weekday when we can't go, because obviously the co-host of The Bunker, Andy Burrows, me and him have got a season ticket. So just in case you ever get home playoff tickets and that sort of thing, in the thought that we might get a home playoff game, you never know. So we'll just buy one in the nosebleeds just in case, when they were very cheap. But we give that ticket away to people who tune into both podcasts and people who maybe can't afford to go. So you know what I mean. It's a nice thing to do to give back to the community and say, hey, that's what we're going to do. But I've enjoyed going. Been the last 3 home openers with Scouse, who you had on, and quite a lot of other UK-based Commanders fans. I think the first year we had 15. I think we had like 7 the year after, and this year I think it was just the 4 of us. But it's been a fantastic ride, especially last year.
I think the most watched clip from the podcast when we had Andy on was him saying how much he hates the Eagles, how much he wanted them to lose in the playoffs. Well, of course, it didn't transpire to be the case. They went on to win the Super Bowl. This year, though, I mean, Deebo Samuel's just been traded now to yourselves. I know our writer, our Washington Commanders writer for HuddleUK, Chris Peck's really excited about that prospect, even though he's not had a good last couple of years, Deebo, necessarily. It feels like the mentality is don't go out and sign loads of superstars. Go out and sign good players and get the best out of them.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, the guys I'm looking at, I'm looking at people like maybe a J.K. Dobbins at running back. I'm looking at your Will Hernandez's at guard. Not absolute off the tree. We're going to sign Ronnie Stanley on a massive contract from Baltimore because that's where we need to be. I would like a splashy move, if that makes sense. Maybe a DJ Reed or a Charvarius Ward might come in. I mean, they're the types of players that I'm at. But someone like Christian Kirk, who's just been released, would be pretty incredible slot receiver for us. If you're looking at a wide receiver room of Kirk, Debo, young Luke McCaffrey and Terry McLaurin, I mean, that is a massive upgrade on, let's be brutal, Noah Brown and De'Ami Brown and Zacchaeus. I mean, there's a big key difference there. But what is really interesting with Jaden is how he's performed and made people better around him. That's been the difference in how we've won games this year.
Stay away from our J.K. Dobbins.
No, I like J.K. I mean, he is a free agent, though, isn't he, at the moment? So
he is, yeah. He is.
It's going to be tough. I don't know what you pay him as a running back, but he had a very good season.
He had a very good year. I would like to have him back. Hopefully, it'll be a positive season for the Commanders. They're a team that I've got no qualms with, a team that I like, and when they're playing great football, entertaining football like last year, and Jaden Daniels is making veteran defenders look silly. It's always good to watch that. So,
yeah.
I wish you guys all the best for the future. And just to go back quickly to this International Fan of the Year award, if you were talking to other fans, not necessarily Commanders fans, and you were talking about how to get into the process, starting off podcasts like you have yourself, what advice would you give to someone?
Yeah, the podcast started really over COVID. I was going on other people's podcasts and talking and getting a bit of exposure, similar to what I'm doing now. But and then I thought, you know what, it's time to start our own show. And the seed was planted, and we said, yeah, we'll go for it. On the International Fan of the Year side, just apply. It's a simple process. It's on the NFL website. It comes out every off season. I think it actually comes out around about January time. Is when they open it up. It's open for a good 4, 5, 6 weeks. Go out there, get involved in your local fan base, whether that's in the UK, whether that's abroad. I know people have got fan clubs all over the place. The game is growing enormously within the UK community and the European community especially. Go out there, get involved in it, and either nominate yourself or get someone who you know to nominate you. It's a simple paragraph, I believe, that they have to write about you. But if they put it in, then you might be lucky. And that is exactly how it was. I was honestly astounded that I'd won it. I was on a podcast like this, and we set up a link and said, we'll set up a stream to thank all our chat who've come in live and have been here all season. And I said, yeah, okay, Scouse, no problem. But what I didn't know is the team had already told him, right, tell him on the stream and then we'll get the reaction. But I had literally no idea. So yeah, it is a blessing, but it's a very easy process to do. And you can win some seriously great prizes.
Wise words, humble words from Scott. And Scott, you do the Bunker podcast, which I believe is at Commander Bunker. Is that
yeah,
right?
that's Andy Burrows. I'm over at 1 Point Safety Show, but I also do one with a couple of American friends called the Bleeding Burgundy podcast. So there's 2 podcasts that I'm on, but the 1 Point Safety Show is Scouse's and mine, and then I'm on probably 4 pods a week, to be honest with you. So it's busy, but I enjoy it.
Well, you certainly enjoy it. Certainly sounds like you're a deserving winner of the award. Enjoy Green Bay. Enjoy the draft. As I say, Day 3, we'll all be keeping the eye out. I'm not sure what round it'll be, but hopefully it'll be an easy name for you, a John Smith.
I really hope so. John Smith from Iowa. That's what I want. Yeah.
Good luck. Thank you very much for joining us as well, and enjoy Green Bay.
Thank you, Philip. I appreciate it. And go out and subscribe to Huddle UK. Great shows.
Thank you very much for the plug. Well, all that's left to say, I guess, is thank you very much to everyone who's listened this week to the Huddle UK podcast. Remember, go and give us a follow over on social medias at Join the Huddle UK. Thank you to Chris. Thank you to Scott. And as we touched upon right at the top of the episode, we had another really long interview. I had a really good chat with someone who you'll see on the upcoming episodes. We were only going to talk for 20, 30 minutes, and we ended up on a call for about 2 hours. So trying in the process of whittling that down to get loads of great content for you over the coming days and weeks at Huddle UK. So stay tuned for that. Make sure to drop us a follow on social media. Don't miss anything. All the clips from this episode and next episode coming out are over on TikTok, Instagram, and all the rest of it. So won't bore you with any more. Thank you very, very much for joining us, and we will see you on next week's episode of the Huddle UK podcast.